Good morning and welcome to another Saturday conversation. It is my pleasure to be here with you today as we head towards the end of the year and really begin to plan for the future and look forward to the new year. Um, I haven't been around for a while and I'm so glad to be back. And I chose two issues of Science of Mind magazine from 2012, which was uh, the last presidential election before Trump came in. This was during second term of Obama. And there was this idea that I had. So I went and looked at these two magazines, and let's see if I can share the magazine covers. Let's see here. If I said share my screen, I'd have to do it twice. So the first one was this one. And I don't know if you're seeing that. Actually, you're not seeing that. But it was called A Kinship of Faiths. And looking at how all the different philosophies and faiths are working together to create this world that works for all. And so and there it is. Um, so that's the first one I looked at, and then the second one was this one that looked at the emerging world, and it was quite interesting looking at these two, and there was so much good stuff that I had a hard time selecting. But what I wound up with is I took this approach from Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I took a little bit from Dr. Goswami to look at the emerging new world, and to begin to understand and look at what's on the horizon, what's next, what's new, who are we to become. As our teachings and our founder Ernest Holmes says, change your thinking and change your life. Change your thinking and change your life. So we are here today to refresh ourselves on these teachings, if you will, and begin to look at how we incorporate them in our lives, how we begin to make a way of living that is in alignment with our teachings, that is in alignment with what we see as a world that works for all. Now, I know that for me, after the past elections and all of that, and now all of that stuff is settling in, we begin to think about what's next. What's next? How do we begin to move forward? How do we begin to operate in a way that that allow our true spiritual essence to come forth, to be present, to operate from that moment of truth? And so, first and foremost, before we get too far down the line, I want to say good morning to everyone out there. I want to say good morning to Shay, who's jumped in from sunny Colorado. And I just want to start with the invocation to bring in that energy. So if you don't mind taking a deep breath. And so as we call forth the spirit of the divine, that intelligent, activating, loving force that creates worlds, that allows us to expand, that allows us to grow, that allows us to step into every moment new and fresh. And so we call forth that energy right now to expand our awareness, to expand our horizons, to expand our very being, to that essence that God has created us to be. And so with that, I just allow that spirit to permeate the space, my room, your room, the internet, the entire world, as we begin to step into this new beginning. And so it is. Amen. And so it is. Amen. And we have Linda this morning. Good morning. Good morning. Anyone else out there, please chime in. And let's see what we can do with this. So we got Ray chiming in from up north there. How you doing? Good to hear from you. Haven't seen you in a while because I haven't been here in a while. But yeah, really glad to be here. And so as I looked at these two issues, this kinship of faith in this emerging world, I came up with this title, The Emerging World, Giving Birth to Something New, Exploring the Path to Our Future. Exploring the path to our future. And so one of the things that is a cornerstone of our teachings is this idea of vision and visioning. And so as we begin to emerge, step into and give birth and help give birth to this new world, we must first have a spiritual vision. What does that look like? What does it look like to give birth to an emerging world? What is the process of emerging? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What do I have to become for that vision to step forth? What do I have to become for that vision to step forth? And so this idea of an emerging world giving birth to something new. Now, as with all things that change, we sometimes have a little trepidation about it. We're fearful because we get comfortable in what we know. We get comfortable in what we know. And when we get comfortable, we cease to grow, I believe. And so the thing to do is to figure out what your growing edge is, what my growing edge is, what our growing edge is, so we can begin to imagine something new. One of the teachings that is the foundation of religious science is this idea of oneness and interrelatedness and connectedness. And so the question as we begin to see this new world emerge, what are the connecting points? What are the growing edges? How do I begin to look at things in a way that are emerging as opposed to a divergent moment, as opposed to a divergent moment? And so this idea right here, I think, as we step into this, what's next? What's next? Now, Dr. Barbara Marx Hubbard said this: something is truly ending, she says, whether it be from the Mayan prophecy or environmental problems or a series of other crises. A certain form of growth and consciousness has been increasingly destructive to human and earth life. As there is a time of things coming to an end, there is also a rising up of human creativity, consciousness, love, and wonderment. So we are simply celebrating the emerging quality of humanity and calling the birth of the next phase of human evolution. Of human evolution. Now, when we think about that, that steps right into our vision. What's next? What are you being called to do? What are you being called to say? Are you called to be a writer or a speaker or a service person? Or how do we begin to be active in this teaching? How do we begin to be the sermon that we see, right? Because one of my favorite poems is called The Sermons That We See, that goes, I'd rather see a sermon than to hear one any day. I'd rather one to walk with me than just to show the way. The eye is a better pupil and more willing than the ear. Advice may be misleading, but examples are always clear. And so that's what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to be the sermon that we see. And so what is that calling for? I believe, looking at these two magazines in the series, we are stepping into an interdisciplinary approach to life, a way of living that utilizes various disciplines, including theology, philosophy, psychology, ecology, sociology, seeking to understand how these different perspectives relate to one another and form our understanding of the world, creating a world that works for all. Where we step into a religious science example of religious beliefs, practices, and experience, seeking to understand how these different aspects of religious life impact individuals and communities. Now, that's a lot, but that's what life is. Life is this multifaceted thing. And so as we begin to emerge into this new world, as we begin to give birth to this new way of being, we have to look at all aspects of life. We can't be tunnel vision. We can't allow ourselves to be petty. We have to step into our teachings that says, as a person thinketh, so are they. As they continue to think, so shall they remain. And so, what are you thinking about right now? How are you looking to operate in this emerging new world? That's a question. How are you looking to operate? So if you have any emerging ideas about that, drop them in the chat so we can share them. And Linda says, emerging is one of my God quality words for this year. All year, I have been unclear why. Well, this is why. You've been preparing, I would say, for this moment in time. For this moment in time to begin to figure out and see, what are you to become? What are we to become? Because it's going to take everybody and everything, right? The individual and the collective. And so, what is this vision? What do we think a vision could be? I would say this: a vision of a new world, understanding the interconnectedness of life, human impact on the environment, promoting sustainable living, protecting animal rights and welfare, building equitable and inclusive community, and future vision for a harmonious world. That's what we're being charged to do. We're being charged to do those things, to look at how we begin to make a way out of no way, some people might say. But this is the vision. This is the vision where we understand the connectedness of all things, where we begin to look at the impact that we have on our environment, to look at everything, the teachings of a world that works for all means just that: the planet, the plants, the animals, the humans, the air, things seen and unseen. What is that new vision? This is the new vision. To understand that relatedness, to understand our impact, to understand that we have a right and we are here to interact with everything around us. Our teaching is called religious science. And by definition, the first reading or the first sentence in the Science of Mind textbooks, Ernest Holmes says, I look forward to the day when science and spirituality walk hand in hand from the visible to the invisible. Science and spirituality walking hand in hand, meaning we begin to get a better perspective of the world. We begin to get a better vision, or at least an insight of all there is. Because we know no one has ever seen energy or electricity. We see the effects of it. So there's an invisible thing that's set forth by principle that is demonstrated by different laws extracted from that principle, whether it's hydroelectricity or thermoelectricity or solar electricity or turbine electricity. There's all these different laws extracted from that one principle of electricity. So let us begin to think about the principles of life, the principles of equity, the principles of inclusion, the principles of working through things so that something emerges. You know, there's this idea of chaos, right? And some people say, boy, we've stepped into chaos. And one definition, looking at it from a scientific point of view, is chaos is order reemerging. So chaos is not this random craziness. It is a new order beginning to emerge. And when we can vision that, knowing that the creative rebirth, which fits with all the cycles of the universe, we know that we begin to articulate a reemergence of something grand, of something more holistic, of something that is intrinsic to the wholeness of the universe. So the question, how do you see yourself in that vision? How do you see yourself right here? How do you see yourself understanding the interconnectedness of life? How do you see yourself building equity, inclusive communities? Knowing that, you know, some of the participants may be unharmonious, or some of them may appear to be harmonious, but they may be ushering in something else that creates harmony. See, we have to begin to look beyond the immediate moment, because we know that cause and effect are not always closely related. Cause and effect are not always closely related. So we know if I stick my hand in the fire, I get an immediate cause and effect relationship. But if I'm being out in the elements and I don't put on the right clothing or the right sunblock or whatever, that's a process where the cause and the effect are not always closely related, but there is an effect. And so we have to begin to look at life in this expanded now. In this expanded now. I don't know if some of you remember, there's a book, and I'm sure a lot of you may have read it or heard of it, or maybe not. But there was this book that came out in the mid-90s called The Celestine Prophecy. The Celestine Prophecy. And it had these 9 insights that if we could embody them, it would change the world. It would change the world. And one of those points was called the expanded now. How do we begin to look at life in this expanded moment, not in what's going on right now, but begin to look at it in an expanded moment, looking at history to understand how we got here, and then begin to look a little bit forward based on what we know up to this point. That's what our teachings are telling us. How do we remake the world? How do we help birth this emerging world? Just like when a mother is giving birth, there are certain techniques that they teach the mother. First thing, I'm not a mother, but I was there when I had my children, when my wife had my children, and they tell you to breathe, to relax, to take it in, to get centered. And then once you got there, what's the next thing they tell you? You got to push, right? They tell you to push. So as new life begins to emerge, there's this interchange of breathing and pushing, right? So there's this yin and yang moment. There's this opportunity for us to understand the nuances of life and to move forward in that. To move forward in this understanding that there's relaxation and then there's a little bit of uncomfortability. But at the end of that process, that yin and yang process, comes forth this beautiful life. And that's what we're looking to emerge into. Now, once we have begin to cultivate this new vision, this new idea, this new way of living, the next thing that we need to do is understand really intrinsically the web of life, shifting that should be from ego to essence, an evolutionary leap. And this is what Barbara Marx Hubbard says in her book, Emergence, the shift from ego to essence. She says this: the simple practice that we can all do is to create an inner sanctuary and place your attention on the feeling of experiencing your own higher intuition, higher self, essential self. Just experience the oneness of the aspect of your being that is spirit, that is divine, that is energy. When you put your attention on it, a shift actually comes into your heart, not simply as a generalized kind of spiritual force, but as the incarnation of that force as you. Now think about that. We know that thoughts are things, and I would suggest that a lot of us have had these ideas where we have put our attention on something, not placing any judgment of good or bad, but when we put our attention on something, it shows up in our life. It shows up in our life. And that happens when we begin to shift and understand this web of life, this energetic attraction, corresponding aspect that allows us to create the world that we would like to live in. And to do that, we have to do it holistically. We do it in a manner that says we know the yin and yang is always in effect. We look at the seasons. We look at the rotation of the earth. We look at the cycles of the moon, right? We understand that this life is based on patterns and cycles that have been going on for a very long time. They say the universe has been around some 20 billion years, and life as we know it on Earth has been around for about 3.8 billion years. There's been a lot of patterns that have established and given us insight, if we would look at them, to understand how we can help bring forth this emerging new world. Just think about this. Think about this. We have recorded evidence of ancient societies looking at and calculating the reappearance or the reoccurring pattern or cycle of comets, right? That still come with regularity, hundreds of years, some of them, which shows that there's this way of being in the world that allows us to step in. If we are aware, if we are looking, if we're moving from the essence, that connectedness of all things, then we begin to see how it all works, what comes together. And so, the next thing we begin to think about is, okay, as we begin to understand the essence of life and we begin to try to operate from that essence, that spiritual energy that is unseen but is connected to all things, one of the questions in the visioning process is, what do I have to become to make this vision happen? What do I have to become? What do we have to become to make this vision happen? Well, Dr. Goswami, he's a quantum physics emeritus, he says this. We must become quantum activists. Quantum activists. And when we look at science plus spirituality, we get a shift. Dr. Goswami firmly believes if science and spirituality, meaning matter, mind, vital energy, and intuitive archetypes, are integrated, everything will shift. Everything. Integration requires doing and being alternative, which helps create new pathways. It's a process. It is the path of inner creativity, making brain circuits of various archetypes shifting into a new way of being, where there are no mediating agents between the material, i.e. us and this planet, and the non-material, the energy, those invisible forces that we know are there. And since everything is created by and of consciousness, there's no duality to bridge. Quantum activism is about changing ourselves and our societies using quantum principles. Now, that's a lot, I know. But that's the work that we have to do. This is religious science. This is the way of getting science and spirituality together to work harmoniously, to understand the nuances, to be aware, to be observant. And I would submit, to be a good scientist, you got to have a science journal. You got to have a science journal so you can begin to take notes about, I did this experiment, here were the conditions, here was the time frame of that experiment, if you will, and here's the results. And like a good scientist, once you've captured that information, you slightly change the elements of the experiment and see if the outcome change. If I boil this liquid at 100 degrees versus 200 degrees, what happens? What happens if I boil this liquid at 100 degrees and put this substance in it, and then I do it at 200 degrees and put this other substance in it that are very similar? So in essence, we're saying that we have to become scientists about life, about love, about humanity, about coming together in harmony, knowing that we have cycles of ups and downs. That's the nature of life. Life is this two-component thing called birth and death. But they're not in competition with each other. They're not fighting each other. They're not against each other. One is not right and the other is wrong. It is the cycle. It is the cycle. And once we understand that, life becomes a lot easier, I would say. And that we have to begin to move with light. We have to move with light, right? Because light is this active, spiritual, physical thing, if you will, ethereal. Because if I take a prism and I shine light through it, what happens to the light? It diffracts and it becomes the rainbow. When the sun comes through a prism-like environment, you see the rainbow, all the colors. And then the other thing you notice, if you're able to get a clear vision of that rainbow, it becomes at the very growing edge from red to orange. There's this moment between red and orange where they blend together and you don't know which is which. And then it emerges into orange. And then that orange emerges into yellow. And so forth, all the way up the rainbow scale. That's what we are beginning to be called to do in this emerging new world. We have to begin to stop looking at things so simple. Yes, look at them simple so we can appreciate them and love them and don't get too caught up. But at the same time, we have to begin to look at them in an expanded way, taking the light and diffracting it into something else. There's no difference between light and darkness. They are the same thing. We've allowed, as the Swami said, there is no duality. We've allowed this world that has gotten out of touch with reality to move into this thing that says one is against the other. Light and darkness, these are two mortal enemies. They're one and the same thing. And if we look at most creation stories, they all start in darkness. In the beginning, there was darkness, and then there became light. So out of the darkness became light, not in an adversarial way, but in a way of emerging, in a way of taking all these elements, seen and unseen, and creating something new from that darkness. Just like a baby in the womb, just like we begin to give birth to this new way of living. And once we do that, we become this, we have to become, he said, quantum activists, meaning we have to understand quantum principles. We have to begin to understand how to maneuver in a more technical and scientific world. Of course, everybody is aware that AI is coming, right? AI is already here, depending on where you are on that spectrum. And in a lot of cases, people are very afraid. But it's a part of the web of life. It's like anything else. How do you intend to use it as a quantum activist, as a religious scientist? How do you plan to use it to create harmony and bring love and peace to all things? Now, once that has happened, once we get our hands around this, once we understand who we are and what we're creating, the next part is communication. Listen to the sound of the drum, right? In our ancient times, the drum that represented the rhythm of life, the rhythm of the heartbeat, one of those cycles or patterns that we spoke about earlier. And so Dr. Barbara Marx Hubbard said this: I would like to see ongoing global communication hubs continuing to tell the stories of what's emerging, what's working, what's loving, what's creative. Because the news, as most people are getting it, does not report what's emerging. People don't know. What are changes and challenges facing the emerging world on the global and local scale, requiring a multidisciplinary approach to address? Once we get this vision, we have to communicate it. When we look at what has been taking place for the past few months, communication was at the key of that. It was the very heart of what was disseminated, if you will. So the question, how are we going to communicate this teaching of a world that works for all? This scientific, this quantum physics, this way of looking at all aspects of the universe in this evolutionary cyclic world. I would suggest we start with the firm vision that says we are giving birth to something new. And for all the mothers who've given birth, you understand better than I do what it means to give birth to something. When you give birth to something, everything changes. When you look at a mother who's giving birth, her whole body changes. The chemical release changes. The way the body functions to feed two people at one time. I mean, the whole idea of expanding. That's what we have to begin to be. Either giving birth or being the midwife to help give the birth. We understand there's a process. There are many elements. There are many elements. And so as we do this, I took this from Eugene Holden in that, and he speaks to this emerging world. He says, do not imitate the ways of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then he says this from the Science of Mind textbook. God's world is perfect. And this is the principle we have to demonstrate. That the world is perfect and that we have to demonstrate this regardless of the challenges. And so he writes in this piece, he says, when we take the time to become still and quiet the mind, we begin to sense that there is more to this physical world that meets the eye. We begin to feel something stirring within us that longs to be expressed through us. This is a world in consciousness that is greater than we could ever imagine. This is the world of God, the infinite intelligence that sustains and governs the universe. In this world, all needs are met. In this world, desires are brought to fruition. This is the world of God, the divine spirit that Dr. Holmes speaks about. This world is perfect, and it is perfect right now. This is what we are here to manifest, to demonstrate. This is the world that desires to emerge from the very depths of each person's being. We are told not to conform to the physical world. This means that we are not to be snagged by the material and consumerism of this world. Instead, we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. In order to change our lives, we are to change our thinking. To experience this emerging world, we must recognize that it exists. The more we recognize that this inner world, the more it becomes present in our outer life. As a result, the outer world reveals the perfection of the inner world, and we experience heaven on earth right here, right now. And that's the charge. I know that was long, but that's the charge. The charge is we have to begin to be this steward of this emerging world. And so, as this affirmation says, there is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect, and that life is our life now. That's our life now. And so I'll just stop there and see if we have any questions, any comments that will take this to a level of understanding. Roy says, your message is comforting, especially at this time. After the Trump election, I feel solace, focusing my attention on my inner sanctuary. And Shay says this, I have been working on creating an inclusive and equitable community for the past 5 years. It's one of my calling. It's too big to do alone. I'm waiting for God's provisions while doing my healing. And I would suspect everybody's doing that. Everybody's doing that in their own way. And now we need to come together as a community through this idea of oneness, through this idea of being together, so that we can begin to say yes to life, so that we can begin to not look at things in this antagonistic way, but look at everything as a point of communication that's calling us to be more, that's calling us to exemplify the oneness of life, that's calling us to be more than we ever thought we could be, and in fact, stepping into that grand idea of what we were called to be, what we were made to be. And that is emanations of the Most High God with powers and insights and ways of communication and ways of understanding the world once we get in tune. And so the question becomes, as we move forward, this emerging world giving birth to something new. It's a vision. It's something that we have to follow. It's a process. We have to be involved. And so I hope everyone that's here and everyone that may see this later makes a commitment to be involved, to take part in this birth process, whether it's in any of the various modes of serving the birth process. Because we know it's possible. It's a matter of shifting our perspective. And so I'll stop there, and hopefully this sits with everybody and cause them to think, gives a little pause to how are we showing up in the world? How am I acting? What am I doing? And I'll close with that poem that I mentioned early, Sermons We See. I'd rather see a sermon than to hear one any day. I'd rather one to walk with me than just to show the way. The eye is a better pupil and more willing than the ear. Advice may be misleading, but examples are always clear. And the very best of teachers are the ones who live their creed, for to see good put into action is what everybody needs. I can soon learn to do it if you let me see it done. But if I look your words and your tongue fast, I may misunderstand. And so that's our challenge. That's our way. Let's be the sermon of the emerging new world, giving birth to something great and grand and glorious, and saying yes to the power and presence of the divine spirit in all things. And so with that, I trust that you have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, and peace and blessings.
New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.